Hey there, welcome back to the Part 2 lesson on inflation. Why do we have inflation? Can't the government prevent it and keep the rate at zero? This is where economics come into play. There are whole courses on the topic, which is beyond the scope of this lesson, but we can oversimplify it for a very basic understanding. Inflation results from an increase in demand for products and services or an increase in production costs. Here's an example. Let's say Bernice is a baker. She creates a new children cake. Delicious. Adding children to the batter keeps the sponge moist and tender. If Paul Hollywood tried it, I'm sure she would get a handshake. Each cake costs her $10 to make, so she sells it for $15, giving her a profit of $5. If the cost of flour goes up by $1, and she still wants to make a $5 profit, she will have to charge more. The price will increase to $16. An increase in production or input costs, such as the raw materials that she uses, causes an increased price to her customers. Increases to cost is known as cost push inflation. Input cost increases push up the price. There are many reasons for costs to go up, more than we can go into. If the business wants to make the same amount of profit, it has to pass the cost to the customer by raising their prices. Now consider that Bernice started her business to make money. She wants to make as much money as she can. Yay, capitalism. Word gets out that her cake is scrumptious. More customers line up to buy her cakes. The demand exceeds the number of cakes she can make in a day, so she decides to raise the price of each cake to $20. So it's not just input costs rising that raises prices. Increased consumer demand can also raise prices. This is known as demand pull inflation. Prices are pulled up by consumer demand. If a lot of people want something and there is a limited supply, businesses will increase their prices to take advantage of the demand. Both cost push and demand pull inflation occur together and influence each other. As the demand for her new cake grows, other bakers see an opportunity to enter the market to provide similar cakes as well. They all need flour for their cakes, so the demand for flour goes up. Flour suppliers see an opportunity to make more profit, so they raise their prices. But the increased price of flour does not just affect Bernice and the other cake bakers, it affects anyone needing flour. Cookie bakers, bread bakers, etc. Our economy is a connected system where many factors can affect demand and supply. A business here might rely on ingredients or materials from a local supplier or someplace far away. Those suppliers will also want to make profits if the stuff they supply are in demand. Even local ingredient suppliers could run into supply problems. What if people start having less children? Bernice's main ingredient will become more scarce. You get the idea. Over time, people come to expect inflation. The idea that costs will increase becomes embedded into our expectations. Knowing there will be inflation and knowing that it will erode their purchasing power, people will adapt to it by demanding ongoing wage increases. Higher wages means higher labor costs, means higher prices to cover those costs. Expectation of inflation becomes built-in inflation. If you have no inflation or negative inflation, known as deflation, it usually means no one is buying stuff. There is no demand to produce anything, so prices are stagnant or dropping. If people stop buying children cake, Bernice and everyone who jumped on the children cake bandwagon won't be able to sell all the cakes they make. If there is no demand, then some of them will become unprofitable and fail. As businesses fail, fewer new businesses are also created. Workers lose their jobs, and you end up with unemployment, which means less people can buy stuff, and so on. This is bad. In our system, we have decided it is better for the country to have some inflation. Deflation often means high rates of unemployment. But we don't want the inflation rate to be too high. Remember, when we apply the compounding calculation to something, the higher the rate, the faster the amount being compounded grows or even doubles. If the amount being compounded is the cost of living, the higher the rate, the faster the nominal amount of your living expenses will increase as time passes. As a result, we want some inflation, just not too much. A capitalist and consumer-focused society, like the one we have, needs economic growth to provide work and a higher quality of life for its citizens. Growth will cause inflation. A small, steady amount of inflation reflects a strong economy where unemployment is lower and consumer and businesses feel confident. This only works if inflation is a small, steady amount. For confidence, both consumers and businesses need to anticipate how much prices will increase. Most countries have decided that inflation should be 2% or less a year. For consumers, knowing that inflation is 2%, will expect or negotiate 2% wage increases. For businesses, they can anticipate the cost of supplies or wages that they have to pay. There is also an argument that businesses, knowing that costs might be around 2%, might not raise prices as quickly in order to keep customers happy. For example, Bernice's cost of making a children's cake is $10 per cake, and she sells it for $15. But she has competitors doing the same. If inflation is 2%, the next year she knows her cost will be $10.20. If she raises her prices and everyone else doesn't, her customers will go elsewhere. She is willing to let her profit drop from $5 per cake to $4.80. In fact, she might be willing to let her profit go down for 2 or 3 years before raising the prices. However, if inflation is too high or uncontrolled, instead of confidence, you have uncertainty. Costs jump faster than consumers have planned for. Their income did not keep pace with costs, so they buy less, but also demand larger wage increases. If costs and wages jump dramatically and sales drop, businesses are less likely to hold price increases. It is one thing to absorb a small increase, another to absorb large increases knowing that prices and wages could jump again next year by a high unknown amount. If inflation was 8% and not steady, Bernice's cost might jump to $10.80 this year, and it might jump even higher next year. Bernice is afraid it will jump another 8%, but maybe 9 or 10. She will raise her prices much faster. But not every business is affected by cost increases to the same degree. If costs are generally going up by an uncontrolled amount, let's say 6%, but a business finds their costs going up by 3%, they might still raise their prices by 6% because they can hide the fact that they are making more profit. All their customers know is everything is going up a lot, so it is hard to determine if a business is becoming predatory. A steady rate of anticipated inflation allows people to plan. We want some inflation for growth, but not uncontrolled runaway inflation, because that would make it impossible for people to live. In a worst-case scenario, runaway inflation can become hyperinflation. In 2023, Turkey had an inflation rate of 61.36%. Crazy, huh? And that only made it the country with the 6th highest inflation in the world. The country with the highest inflation in 2023 is Venezuela at 318%. So how is inflation maintained at a small controlled rate? Inflation in many countries is controlled through central banks. Each country has their own. In Canada, it's the Bank of Canada. But they all operate in a similar fashion. The Bank of Canada has decided that our goal is to keep inflation below 2%. They do this by setting interest rates and other forms of monetary policy. We'll just look at how setting interest rates affects inflation, as interest rates have the most direct effect on individuals. The Bank of Canada sets the policy rate that banks pay when they borrow money. The banks will add between 2 to 3% to the policy rate to get their prime rate. The prime rate is the rate they base their loans off. Depending on the borrower and the type of loan, the bank will charge more than the prime rate. This makes borrowing more expensive and harder to get for both businesses and individuals. The general idea is that inflation is caused by too much demand. When borrowing is expensive, people and businesses will spend less. Some people will choose to save more if interest rates are higher. This drives down demand and brings down the inflation rate. As a result, growth is damaged. In other words, the Bank of Canada's only method of taming uncontrolled inflation is to take a sledgehammer to the economy. It must hurt the country's growth. People with debt will pay more in interest costs. Businesses will go bankrupt. Employees will lose their jobs. And all of this is happening while the inflation rate is high, so living expenses are going up faster than wages. Raising interest rates is guaranteed to financially hurt some people and businesses. The effects on those people can be quite damaging, but uncontrolled inflation hurts everyone, and if it leads to hyperinflation, think Venezuela. And that was the good news. A sledgehammer is not a surgical tool. It is slow and unwieldy. The Bank of Canada estimates it takes 12 to 18 months for each rate increase to take effect. It takes that long for its influence to work through the economy. For each rate increase, we don't know who is going to lose their business or job, or if it will be enough or too much. If it is not enough, uncontrolled or stubborn high inflation will take hold. If it is too much, we plunge into recession. Raising interest rates increases the possibility of recession. However, even if we don't technically enter a recession, because the economy slows, some people will lose their jobs. For those that are unemployed, finding a new job may take longer. So how do you survive inflation in general and potential periods of high inflation? There are 3 potential hardships created. The first is escalating costs due to high uncontrolled inflation. The second is escalating interest rates to try to bring down inflation. The third is loss of a business or job. All 3 problems can be moderated by a life spending strategy. I'm going to use the popular 50-20-30 guideline as an example, but it's not the only spending guideline. I'm just using it to explain how to think about things. The 50-20 model means 50% of your income is spent on fixed costs such as housing, utilities, food, debt payments, etc. These are the costs you need to survive. 20% goes towards savings and investments. 30% goes towards discretionary or lifestyle spending such as vacations, dining out, potato chips, piano lessons, yummy cakes, concert tickets, etc. Uncontrolled inflation is hopefully not a frequent occurrence. When this happens, you reduce your discretionary spending first. Do not start spending from your savings or reducing your savings and investing to preserve your lifestyle. Because uncontrolled inflation takes time, sometimes years, to bring back under control, you are reducing discretionary spending to continue to live within your means. When your income finally increases to make up for the lost purchasing power, you can add the discretionary items back. If inflation starts to get out of control, you know your central bank will raise interest rates to combat it. It's one of their only tools, so they will use it. Rising interest hurts those with debts with variable interest rates. Examples could be credit card balances or variable mortgages. The less debt you have, the better. If you have debt, try not to incur more. It will only make things worse since interest rates will stay high for months, if not years. Remember, it takes 12 to 18 months for the rate increases to fully affect the inflation rate. Again, reduce discretionary spending first. Try not to use savings. If you are in real trouble, you may need to cut investing temporarily to reduce debt or make your debt payments. Why have I been recommending cutting spending over using savings? Because of the triple whammy: higher costs, higher interest, and job loss. What if you experience all 3? Job losses will follow inflation and rising interest rates. Businesses don't fire employees right away if they don't have to. They hope the downturn is short-lived. As time passes, they also have to start cutting discretionary spending to stay alive. A certain percentage of their employees are discretionary. They are needed when business is good, but not when business declines. Job loss might occur months or years after high inflation arrives and interest rates have gone up. That's when you most need your savings. You don't want to use it up maintaining discretionary spending. If you lose your job, you need it. Hopefully this information helps, but that's all for now.
Some of you might have been shocked at this scene from the video if you thought we were going to talk about cakes for children, not children-flavored cakes. It shouldn't have been a surprise. It was right there. Look, no apostrophe S. And this is why you should have paid more attention in English class. You may have noticed that Winston's strategies for dealing with inflation are all based on having a life spending strategy in place. What is a life spending strategy? It just refers to how you're going to save, borrow, earn, spend, and invest throughout your entire life. Now that you know about compounding and inflation, we're going to start with the basic concepts surrounding debt and savings. Stay tuned for the next video with our new surprise presenter. Thank you for watching.